अस्मद्परम्पर्याय विद्महे ज्ञानलिङ्गेश्वराय धीमहि तन्नो गुरुः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ योगमहर्षि डॉक्टर स्वामी गीतानंदगिरि गुरु महाराज की जय। ओम पुदुवै कलैमामणि पुदुवै शक्ति योगचारिणी अम्माजी मीनाक्षी देवी भवनानी गुरु माता की जय। ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। हरि ओम। नमस्ते, स्वागतम, वणक्कम, bonjour, buongiorno, buonasera, buonanotte, huya more, boreida, kiora, salamat pagi, ayubovan, ayushman bhava, subdinam, salom. Welcome to today's Scintillating Saturday, where we are going to be looking at the concept of manas, mind. Before I start, I must warn you that, like most concepts in Indian culture, there are multiple ways you can perceive these concepts and terms. So though we normally talk of manas as mind, many people actually even talk about it and translate it as the heart. Because when you are filled with manas, it's also a beautiful feeling coming from the heart at times. So you'll often find people use the term manas meaning the heart, manas meaning the mind. So many usages. In fact, in Tamil, manam is the term in Tamil for manas. And so there's a beautiful song where the devotee is singing to Lord Krishna that my manam, here it is the mindful heart, the heartful mind. So not mind, not heart. Mindful heart and heartful mind is what manam is. And she says, it is in turmoil like the waves of the ocean. Alaipayude Kannam yen manam, my manam. Alaipayude. And like the waves of the ocean, like that, the turmoil, the turbulence that is there in my manam. When I think of you, when I hear your beautiful flute music, Ananda Mohanam Venu Ganam Adil. Venu Ganam is the flute music. Mohana is that which pulls you towards it. It creates the moha, which is infatuation and desire to be one with it. That is why Maya is called Moha Maya, because it does that. And Lord Vishnu in his feminine incarnation is called Mohini. He creates a desire in everyone, including Lord Shiva. Thanks to which we have Ayyappa Swami. Alaipayude Kannam yen manam alaipayude Ananda Mohana Venu Ganam Adil alaipayude. What a beautiful, beautiful way to understand manas. This manas is normally traditionally considered one of the four components of what we understand as mind. And it is said that these antakaranas that work internally, the internal processes, include the chitta, the mana, the buddhi and the ahankara. Chitta as the subconscious memory bank. It is your pen drive with all your data on it. Chitta. You then have the manas, which is the conscious mind, buddhi, which is the discerning intellect, and ahankara, the sense of self. Self-ideation, self-identification principle, ahankara. But when we talk about mind, we also bring in the concept of ekendriya, the one sense. And that is why after the last 2 weeks where we have discussed the Jnanendriyas and the Karmendriyas, the senses that give us information and data, the Jnanendriyas, and then the Karmendriyas which give us that sense of doing. So sense of being and sense of doing, sort of. These 5 plus 5, 10, Dasendriya, are dependent on the mind, the manas. Because without the mind, all of these senses fall flat. So you can think of the sensory apparatus like the best computer, digital software, hardware. But if the electricity is not passing through your computer, even if it is a supercomputer, it will have no use, it will fall flat. So the electrical impulse that enables the sensory apparatus to function is the manas. So mana as the ekendriya that is enabling all the sensory functions to manifest. Sometimes it is called the 11th sense. Ekadasendriya. So ekendriya, ekadasendriya. Because it is the most important one. Once the mind has been withdrawn from the sensory apparatus, the metaphor given in the Bhagavad Gita and in other scriptures is of a tortoise, kurma. And that just as the tortoise withdraws its limbs into its shell, it withdraws the limbs into its shell. Similarly, we withdraw the senses into the source, and that source is the mana. You withdraw into it. And this is why when we talk of pratyahara, it is not a sensory withdrawal as normally translated. It is a withdrawal from the senses. So what are you withdrawing from the senses? You are withdrawing the mind. Because the mind energy is the energy that enables the sensory apparatus to function. The moment you withdraw the mind from the senses fall flat. If you are not there, who is seeing? If you are not there, who is hearing? That you, which is the mind, is withdrawn, taken on an internal journey rather than an external journey. And this is why the process of pratyahara is often put into the bahiranga, but Swamiji felt it is also an antaranga practice because it is the withdrawal of the mind from the senses, not just the withdrawal of the senses. This concept of the mind being the deciding factor. The manas is the deciding factor whether you are going to be a slave of the senses or whether you are going to be a master of the senses. Whether you will be caught in the indriya jala and you will be an indriya dasa. Dasa is often a slave. Now in Bhakti Yoga we use it in a very positive way when we say we are a slave to the divine. So we have Deva Dasa, Devi Dasa, Rama Dasa, Krishna Dasa. I often think Yoga Dasa is a good one. Though at one time I was so enamored with Mahakavi Subramanya Bharatiyar, I thought I'll keep, but already Bharati Dasan has taken that name. Bharati Dasan, he took it. Yoga Dasa is a good one. I think I should get a copyright on that one. Yoga Dasa. A devoted servant, a devoted slave of yoga. Now here that servant and slave is used in a sense of Nishkama Karma Yoga, Seva, not bondage in the other way. But I'm using here Indriya Dasa as a bondage. We become a slave to the senses. The senses control us. And this is instinctive, impulsive, reactionary behavior. Impulsive, reactionary, instinctive behavior is where the senses control us. The senses determine what we are going to do, how we are going to do, when we are going to do, and why we are going to do. So your whole power of choice has been subjugated by the sensory web, Indriya Jala. So you have fallen into the web of the senses, the Indriya Jala. You have become an Indriya Dasa. And you have to come out of that because you are in bondage. You are a bonded laborer. You are a bonded slave. You have to come out of it. That is where the process of pratyahara is disengaging your mind from its interaction with the senses and the sensory objects. The senses latch on to the sensory objects and the mind empowers that process. The moment you withdraw the mind, the senses cannot continue and they fall flat. This is where when you come into that state of pratyahara, when your Ajna chakra, when that brow center starts to manifest in its full radiance. The lower 5 centers are all sensory centers. The lower 5 centers, Mooladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipuraka, Anahata and Vishuddha or Vishuddhi, are all linked to the sensory engagement. They keep you engrossed in the sensory experience. Like the Maya Jal, you have the Indriya Jal. And you are caught in it. You are seeing that, you are doing this, you are doing that. You are caught in all of that. And you become a slave, a dasa of the Indriyas. This is why all the teachings of yoga, in all the traditions of yoga, the most important teaching is that you need to regain your own self-control, self-responsibility, self-esteem, self-growth, self-realization. All of that has to be there. And this is why the Amrita Bindu Upanishad, a very beautiful Upanishad, which is part of the yoga tradition, it has what is called Shadanga Yoga, a 6-limbed yoga. And interestingly, in that, it begins with pratyahara. That Shadanga Yoga of Amrita Bindu Upanishad begins with pratyahara. And it has a beautiful component, tarka, T-A-R-K-A, which is the introspective self-questioning, which is like a swadhyaya. And that Amrita Bindu Upanishad gives us a beautiful statement in the very second verse. Manayeva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayo. The mind, mana, for the human being, manushya. The mind for the human being is the cause, karanam, of both bondage, bandha, and mokshayo, liberation. Our mind is both the cause of bondage and liberation. Manayeva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayo. What a beautiful teaching. The mind can either be the source of bondage or it can be source of liberation. The laser beam can either be used to take a life or to save a life. A knife can be used for multiple purposes. To cut and sever the bondage or to kill someone. The same mind. So the mind becomes a tool. A tool that can either enable you to go deep into bondage or to liberate yourself. Because bandhaya vishaya saktam, when you get engaged with the vishaya, the things with which the sensory apparatus goes and engages. Sensory engagement. Sensory engagement, sensory engorgement. And you gorge yourself on it. Engorgement. It's never enough, is it? And the sensory experience is never enough. Dil mange more. The heart wants more. It's called, sensory adaptation. The first time you have the experience, it's wonderful, and then the second time it's okay, but then by the time you get it the 10th time, it's not so good, so you want more. This is how the senses trap us deeper and deeper. It's called sensory adaptation. The first time you come to the ashram, if it's the fishing season, all the fish will be drying on the beach. And you will smell the dead fish. Quite a smell. Indescribable stench. But if you have been here for a week or 10 days, you will stop smelling it. Because it's the sensory adaptation. For many kids, the mother and father's voice, they learn to have sensory adaptation. They don't hear them anymore. Many husbands and wives are like that also. You get so numb, you want a bigger experience. You want a stronger experience. You want a more. And you go deeper and deeper into the trap and you are getting bound. Bandhaya vishaya saktam. By going and identifying and engaging with the senses and the sensory object, the mind is leading you deeper and deeper and deeper into that bondage. You are going deeper into that well, bottomless well of desire. Muktyai, for the sake of liberation, mukti. Nirvishayam smritam. You have to move into a state where you go beyond the objects. Bandhaya vishaya saktam muktyai nirvishayam smritam. Muktyai nirvishayam smritam. Muktyai nirvishayam smritam. Manayeva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayo. Manayeva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayo. Bandhaya vishaya saktam muktai nirvishayam smritam. Muktai nirvishayam smritam. Muktyai nirvishayam smritam. Beautiful teachings. The same mind. When you start engaging, same thing Bhagavad Gita tells us, dhyayato vishayan pumsa. You start contemplating the sensory objects and then you are trapped. Dhyayato vishayan pumsa. Sangasteshu bhajayate, sangat samjayate kamat, kamat krodho abhijayate. You have thought about the sensory object, you start to have desire to them, you start to have attachment to them. Sangat samjayate kamat, kamat krodho abhijayate. You are not going to ever get enough, so you go into rage. Krodhat bhavati sammoha. Sammohat smriti vibhrama. And because of that rage, you lose all sense, your buddhi is lost, and you destroy yourself. Where does that destruction start? Where does the bondage start? Where does that diving deeper and deeper into that well of desire start? Contemplating the sensory object, because your mind has gone out and contemplated the sensory object. Dhyayato vishayan pumsa. Because either you like it or you don't like it. Now likes and dislikes, raga, dvesha, are both equally bad. You like a smell, you can get bound to it. You don't like a smell, you can get bound to it. It's called dvesha yoga. Some people, they hate you so much, they become one with you. Imagine you hate somebody so much, you're constantly thinking about them. Most of the asuras hated God so much, they were constantly thinking of God compared to the devotees who once in a while think of food, sleep and shelter. And that is why the asuras often reach the pinnacle much easily, because they constantly, when you hate somebody, that hate will engulf you because it is so powerful. Constantly you will think. So both the raga and the dvesha are equally dangerous when it comes to bondage. It's not just the like, it's the dislike also that can lead us. And that is why the Bhagavad Gita again reminds us, Raga Dvesha Vimukta. You have to go beyond. Raga Dvesha Vimukta Vishayan Indriyaschan Atma Vashay Videyatma. That person who is a Videyatma, Atma Vashay Videyatma, Prasada Madhigachati. You have that tranquility because you have gone beyond likes and dislikes. So the sensory objects do not attract you anymore. Your mind doesn't go out to them. You don't engage with them anymore. And this is why mind is an amazing tool. And this is a tool that the consciousness, the conscious mind is so important because it is a power of choice that you are making. Are you going to choose? Yes, Terry, so right. Where do we choose to place our energy? Because again, remember, where the mind goes, the energy flows. Yato manat tata prana. And this is why taking a step back, which is where Viveka and Vairagya come together. The twin wings of Viveka and Vairagya. Sadhana Chadustaya have this. Vairagya and Viveka, important components of Sadhana Chadustaya. Because you need to have that capacity to take a step back so that you can see the choices you have, and then you have the discerning power to choose that which is evolutionary, to move on what is called the Shreya Marga, the noble path, rather than the Preya Marga, which is the pleasurable path that will just take you deeper and deeper into bondage. You fall prey to it. Preya Marga, you fall prey to it because you get engaged with it and you fall prey to it. When the mind is understood as a Ekendriya, the 11th sense, I am reminded of maybe 30 years ago. Close to 30 years now. Where for the first time I put together a compilation of a primer of yoga theory, which aimed at giving our young children at Yoganjali Natyalayam an opportunity to learn about these beautiful theoretical aspects of yoga. And so I went through about 35 books, brought out the important points and put it in a question and answer form, a primer of yoga theory. It was a small, I called it a book. Somebody would call it a booklet. You know, booklet is a small book. Let's call it a booklet, but at that time for me it was a book. My first book was actually Yoga for Children, which was at the age of 12. But it wasn't really a book in the sense of, as you know it. What happened was, Ammaji in yoga life, every month she would tell me, Ananda, why don't you write a small article for yoga life? And so I would write about the asana, I would write about something that happened in the ashram, and over a period of a couple of years, we had enough of these short one-page articles that it was put together as a book, and we called it Yoga for Children. I have a few copies, not much left of it, but that was, though that was officially my first book at the age of 12, it was actually a compilation of, multiple articles in yoga life. So this was sort of my first book. So I was very proud of it. And so, yes, Balaji, he has gone through so many avatars, and I think for the kids at Yoganjali Natyalayam, my beautiful children at Yoganjali Natyalayam, if they have to choose one book that has influenced their life, I think Primer of Yoga Theory will be there always. So once I did this, I was like, I need to send it to people and get the blessings. Because in Indian culture, whenever you do something, you want the blessings of your elders. So, thanks to Swamiji and Ammaji, I have been blessed by all the great masters in the past 50 years, I would say. Be it, my dear B.K. Iyengar ji, be it T.K.V. Deshikacharya ji, Swami Vedabharati ji, Sri Yogendra ji and the whole family, Dr. Jaydev Yogendra ji, Hansa ji, Tiwari ji at Kaivalya Dama, Bijlani sir, the whole link you can think of, Swami Chidananda of the Divine Life Society, Amrit Desai, then, people like Swami Sachidananda, you name it, and it's been there, right from Devendra Brahmachari, who I met with Swamiji in Delhi in the middle of winter, and that guy, he just had a small cloth on his chest. What amazing tejas he had, Swami Devendra Brahmachari. Loving exchanges with so many of them. So I said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send all of them a copy. So I sent it to S. Vyasa, in those days, VK Yogas, our Guruji Nagendra ji, Nagaratna Didi. I sent it to the Yoga Institute. I sent it to Delhi. I sent it to Bihar. I sent it every place. I had addresses. Amma and Swamiji had all these addresses because of Yoga Life. And it was a good lesson. It was a good lesson. And that's why I'm sharing with you. A few of them wrote back. Not all of them. A few of them wrote back. And, congratulations, blessings, best wishes, the common stuff. What stood out for me were the messages from two amazing people. One was Sri T.K.V. Deshikacharya. And his beautiful blessings where he said, Ananda, may your future grow like a rising sun. Even as I said, the sun's coming up onto me. You can see the sun coming up there. Beautiful blessings. But the most amazing response, well, one of the places actually sent back a note saying, thank you for sending it, but we don't read other people's books. I actually got a letter. Thank you for sending your booklet, but we don't read other people's books. Yeah, I won't forget that one also. But Sri B.K. Iyengar, I call him my yoga uncle because Swamiji and him shared a very beautiful relationship. And one of the prized blessings I got from him at Delhi during one of the yoga weeks was when he said, Ananda is my gem. When someone like that says, Ananda is my gem, it makes not just your day, it makes your life. But Sri B.K. Iyengar ji actually responded with, I think it was a 3 or 4 page typed letter. And he said, congratulations on this, and I'm looking forward to your developing it further. And he said, I feel that in future editions, you can start including these questions also. And he sent me a list of about 50 questions I could include in my next edition. He typed them out. You could include this, you could include that, you could include this. Later on, I went through his books on Pranayama and the Yoga Sutra, Light on Pranayama and Light on Yoga Sutra, from where he had brought these questions. So his questions were actually, the answers were in his Light on Yoga Sutra. So then I brought that into the next edition. And at that time, I remember the question that stood out to me was, he said, you have talked about Jnanendriya and Karmendriya. What about the Ekendriya? And then he said, what about the Dharmendriya? Ekendriya and Dharmendriya. These were questions that B.K. Iyengar ji gave me. The sense, the single sense, Ekendriya, which is Manas, and Dharmendriya, the sense of righteousness itself. What a beautiful, that sense of needing to live a life of righteousness, of nobility, in tune with the dharmic principles, Dharmendriya. This is why in my life, whenever people write to me, I try to support them as much as possible, especially the young people who are starting off on the journey. Because I have been a recipient of the blessings of such masters who have unconditionally, be it Swami Veda, be it Sri B.K. Iyengar ji, be it Guruji Nagendra ji, Tiwari ji, Hansa ji, all of them, unconditional love and blessings is what I received from everyone. And this is why the support that Sri TKV Deshikacharya gave me in those days is something that I value so much. Each one of them enabling me to see further, to grow further. So coming back, Manayeva Manushyanam Karanam Bandha Mokshayo, the same mind that can lead us into bondage through the sensory engagement, making us a bonded laborer, slave. The slave of the senses, Indriya Dasa, you can move into that beautiful state, which is Indriya Jaya. A mastery over the senses, that you go through the senses and you transcend them. Because yoga does not negate the experience. Yoga doesn't negate the experience. It says have the experience. Let that experience transform you and then let it lead you into transcendence. It's always about atita. Indriya atita. But you have to go through it. It's not that you say, I'm not going to see anything and close your eyes. That's escapism. It's called spiritual escapism. Lot of people use spirituality as an excuse not to do what they need to do. I'm so spiritual, I will not do it. No, you are just too damn lazy to do it. It's not closing your eyes. It's not closing your ears. It's not saying, I'm not going to listen to anything. I'll go and sit in a cave where it's soundproof, light-proof cave. That's a sensory deprivation chamber. Okay? That's a sensory deprivation chamber. That is not yoga. Yoga is very clear. The Yoga Darshana of Maharishi Patanjali. When in doubt, go to Maharishi Patanjali. My dear Superman Pat, that time traveler. Go to his words. Bhoga apavargartam drishyam. It is for the sake of going through that experience, the bhoga. And then apavarga. You go through the sensory experience to transcend. Go into a transsensory experience. You have to first understand who you are. There has to be self-awareness. Most people don't have it. The lack of self-awareness and the presence of ego awareness. It's not an ego awareness also. They're not even aware of it. What fat, bloated egos we have on this planet. Swamiji's egodectomy without anesthesia needed more than ever. Self-awareness, self-reflection, self-awareness, self-reflection, self-actualization, self-realization. Uddhavet atma atmanam natmanam avasadayet atmaiva hi atmano bandhu atmaiva vipu atmanah. It is so important that we lift ourselves. And yes, Deolalji, so true. Initially it is awareness of this lower self, and then we grow into the awareness of the higher self, where we realize the microcosm and the macrocosm are one and the same. And it is only the limited, ignorant mind that thinks they are different. Our great Siddhas, Sattamuni Siddha, Andathil ullade pindam, Pindathil ullade andam, Andamum pindamum ontre, Arindu thaan paarkum pode. What's in the cosmos is in you, what's in you is in the cosmos. the cosmos and you are one. You will realize that in that state of contemplation. That was a spontaneous translation of that. Andathil ullade pindam, pindathil ullade andam. As above, so below, as below, so above. And we grow. Initially we think that ego is the self. Initially we think this body is the self. That is why the Taittiriya Upanishad says, initially you think the Annamaya is the self. Then you think the Pranamaya is the self. Then you think the Manomaya is the self. Then you think the Vijnanamaya is the self. Then you think the Anandamaya is the self. And then you realize it's much, much beyond that. As the Purusha Suktam says, that which is manifest, Dasha Angulam beyond that, 10 finger breadths beyond that. 10 finger breadths here is a literal translation. A literal translation of going beyond. Yes, Diyalalji, Sant Keshav Das, and I remember his blessings when he was here in 1993 at the ashram with Swamiji. And so true. Because we need to speak people's language. We need to have a translational experience of these teachings. When we are talking of the mind, again the Purusha Suktam from the Vedic literature tells us that our mind is related to the moon. Chandrama manaso jataha, chaksho suryo ajayata. The eyes are related to the sun, the mind is related to the moon. What a beautiful, beautiful concept. Yes, Nilachal, self-discipline. That's a good one to add to that. Self-awareness, self-introspection, self-reflection, self-discipline, self-actualization, self-realization. We can make a nice sequence of this. And we grow in ourself. The Purusha Suktam so beautifully tells us, Chandrama manaso jatah, chaksho suryo ajayata, nabhya asidantariksham, shirshnaudhyau samavartata. It gives us this beautiful connection. Because the mind itself is like a moon, because the moon has no source of its own light. It can only reflect the light of the sun. So just as the moon reflects the light of the sun, our mind is reflecting the light of pure consciousness, which is Purusha. And that is why when we start to think that the mind is what it's all about, we fall into avidya. Because we have thought, we are thinking that the tool is the big boss. The big boss is the one who is using the tool. The Purusha is using the mana to perceive for the sake of bhoga apavargartha. But what happens is we identify with the tool of perception. It is like the camera thinking, I am the photographer. The news reader thinking that they are making the news. In India, we have some news readers who actually make the news. The teacher who thinks they know it all. Or the student who thinks they know it all. Seriously, I tell you. So important that we realize the mind is only a tool. Now that tool can either lead us into bondage or it can lead us into liberation. And that is why it is so important to realize it is a tool. Realize the qualities of the tool. And then try to go deeper. The journey is inward, forward and upward. Going on that journey to try and find what is it that is the consciousness that is perceiving through this tool called the mind. That is why Maharishi Patanjali so beautifully tells us that because it is a tool, He says what happens is that there is a multitude of tools because every one of us has a mind. So he says there's a multitude of tools and that these are all created tools. Why are they created? Because of avidya. So avidya has created these tools and created an experience that we think I am me and I am seeing. And this is why it is so important to go beyond that experience. This is why the transcendence is such an important component on the yogic journey. Transformation is important and transcendence. Because until and unless we can transcend the lower, we will not grow into the higher. Until the external is transcended, we cannot grow into the internal. Until the gross is transcended, you cannot grow into the subtle and grow into the causal. Sthula, Sukshma and Karana. That journey has to occur. Eka samaye ubayanava dharanam, he says. You cannot have that happening at the same time. He says there will be ati prasanga. He says there will be total confusion. And he says, dhyana heyaha. You have to go into that state of deep meditation to actually have a mind that is clear. Ammaji, many years ago, made a beautiful statement. It was in my DVD on meditation, where I had her give 2 talks as part of the DVD. And she made a beautiful statement. She said, no one is perfect. No one is perfect. And she said, in dhyana, loosely translated as meditation, in dhyana, we become no one. Normally we think we are someone. We always think we are someone. But in that state of dhyana, we move from being someone to becoming no one. And in that state, we become perfect. A very beautiful linguistic metaphor for how this journey occurs. Because as long as we are there, as long as the ego is there, it's going to be a limited experience. And that is why it is only in that transcendence that the ultimate experience can occur. And this is why again Swamiji used to say, people want a personalized universal experience. They want a personalized universal experience. He says, universal is universal. When the drop becomes the ocean, it is the ocean. The drop doesn't remain a drop anymore. This is a very important lesson. And that is why, though the mind is important, though we need to regain control over it, we need to harness its infinite potential so that we move from bondage to liberation. At the same time, we need to realize this is only one part of the journey. Kaivalya is the goal. Thank you so much for being with me today. Your being with me each week enables me to share some of my thoughts. These thoughts that guide us. They guide us. They are the guidelines. They are the stars. They are the stars in the sky that enable us to know where we are going. Tad gati jnanam, says Maharishi Patanjali. Dhruve tad gati jnanam. When you do samyama on the dhruva, the North Pole star is the literal meaning, but the guiding star. Tad gati jnanam. You start to understand where you are going. Let us never forget these guiding lights, these teachings, and the timeless teachers who have shared them with unconditional love, without expectation, fulfilling their dharma. May we fulfill our dharma. That is the least we can do for those teachers. That is the least we can do for this living tradition of yoga. Be blessed wherever you are and be a blessing. Namaste, Dhanyavadaha, Nandri, Vanakkam.